having a little trouble because I do have obsessive compulsive disorder, and so sometimes I'll get into a disagreement with someone on social media and we'll be talking and it'll be like not a particularly unfriendly conversation, but I won't be able to stop thinking about it and I won't be able to stop responding. And it'll be midnight and it'll be 1 o'clock in the morning and I just won't be able to stop. And I have to set those boundaries for myself and it's really, really hard. My husband is really pretty well trained after 9 years of marriage to recognize when I'm sort of going into a death spiral. And he will actually like say, okay, we're going to put your phone and your computer here, and you're going to go upstairs, and you're not going to look at them until the morning. So he's a really good support system for me, but I do have that trouble of not always taking care of myself and recognizing when I'm going to sort of go off the edge.
I know you're talking about OCD, which I think we probably didn't talk about once the recording started, but yeah, that's something that I do in my job is work with folks with OCD. And so with all absolute respect for how much that sucks, I couldn't help but think of that wonderful XKCD comic where he's like, but somebody is wrong on the internet.
It's funny because when that first like went viral, that was my husband was like, "This is you." Like the first time he saw it, he was like, "This is you." So that is me at 5 o'clock in the morning. I've actually like gotten like so worked up about things that I can't go to sleep. Like I just lay there, and then I realized it's because my mind can't stop. Like I can't stop thinking about it, and it's not
Mhm.
like it's not like the conversation was particularly unfriendly. I just can't stop thinking about it, which happens to me a lot.
So I don't want to forget to talk about a subject that's near and dear to me, and that is how we help our kids figure out how to
Oh.
navigate all of this. Again, we are not going to be experts on this. We're not going to have all the answers, but I think I don't know about everyone's kids, but my kids at least are being exposed to so much more of this than I was as a young child. Not that there wasn't any then. I remember my mom talking about Reagan being the devil, but I think my kids are seeing a lot of it, some of it in very positive ways, but they were at a postcard writing party today. They have been to marches. They've been exposed to politics and sometimes extreme politics, and they certainly know what their parents believe. And so I want to make sure that we're teaching them and helping them in a way that does not, create even greater sort of group identity so that they aren't going to be able to accept information that is contrary to things that they've believed. How do we navigate this with kids?
So I'm not a child specialist, but I do have a 7-year-old. And one of the things I've really noticed, and it always jogs my memory back to that developmental psych class back in school, is this idea that as kids' brains start to wrap themselves around these more complex ideas, it's appropriate that there is, categorization and group identity.
Mm-hmm.
And while we might freak out about it, especially when, they're going trying to figure out the difference between cats and dogs, and then they might, try and figure out the difference between boys and girls. These bigger political ideas end up also being appropriately like, are we part of that group or are we part of this group? And I think much like how it works best to give somebody on the other side of a perspective just two talking points of why they might want to consider your idea,
Mm-hmm.
I think it's really important to let it be not just age appropriate, but it's okay that the bigger complex ideas are developed over a very long time, because it's otherwise it's just truly overwhelming and it gets so muddied that kids can end up sort of getting the wrong end of the stick about it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think one of the biggest things in teaching kids to potentially, have productive conversations. Obviously, that kind of stuff is not really developmentally appropriate at young ages, probably not even elementary school ages on like arguing with people. But we can always teach kids the basics of respectful communication and always teach kids the importance of respecting differences. I definitely grew up in the colorblind sort of frame of mind of parenting
Mm-hmm.
children, of like, don't see color, everyone's the same. And since then, over the past 30 odd years, there's been kind of a huge shift in really conceptualizing how kids should comprehend how they relate to the other people in the world around them.
Mm-hmm.
Really teaching children to celebrate differences, that differences aren't a bad thing, and that everybody is deserving of kindness and everybody is deserving of respect. Even if we don't like them, even if we don't want to be their friend, it's still important to be kind to them, with the obvious exception of like if this is a person that's really hurting you, either physically or emotionally being harmful to you. And teaching kids how to recognize that too, so that you can teach them to set healthy boundaries.
Yeah, in hopeful news, kids can actually have their minds changed.
Yes,
So
yes, they can.
if you, want to practice changing someone's mind, um, just this weekend, we had gone to a book fair with our kids, and we were going to their parent-teacher conferences, and we needed something that would, sort of keep them engaged for 15 minutes while we were in another room talking to teachers. And we were trying to get each kid to pick out a book, and my 3-year-old, no problem. My 6-year-old was hemming and hawing over books, and I showed him a book that I thought he would love, and he was like, I don't want that. 5 minutes later, my husband, who didn't realize I had showed him that book, said, here's a book you'll love. We both came to it was very clear it was going to be, and he just totally didn't want to read it. And he wouldn't pick a book, so I just bought that book for him and put it in front of him, and it was the only thing he had to read. And he came out of it saying, Mommy, you and Daddy are really good at picking out books that I don't think I'll like, but I do like.
Awesome.
I was like, well, I don't know if this is a universalizable, I don't think that's a word, generalizable lesson, but I didn't do anything to change his mind except give him no other choice but that book.
I totally do that too. I get books off of, say, the What Do We Do All Day website. She's amazing about posting books in every category you could imagine. And I'll get a couple of those and leave them in the back seat of the car. And when there's nothing else to read, my kiddo will inevitably read them. And then awesome, because she has some new piece of information. I have to remember to read them too. Otherwise I'm like, what? Where did you get that? But there was actually a cool study really recently out that shows that kids, unfortunately, for all of our favorite children's books, they do not get moral lessons as effectively from anthropomorphized animals or flowers or whatever as they do from stories that are actually featuring human beings.
That's interesting.
So it's another knock against the Berenstain Bears.
For listeners who might have older kids, I'd like to recommend the International Baccalaureate curriculum, because I went to an International Baccalaureate, IB for short, school, and there's actually a class you have to take as part of the IB diploma called Theory of Knowledge, that teaches you about how people develop beliefs and how people come to know things as facts. And it's very useful for teaching older kids, I mean like teenagers, about how to discuss things respectfully with other people and how to absorb what other people are telling you and sort of integrate it into what you believe. So as part of this class when I was 17, one of the projects was everybody got divided up into pairs, and everybody was randomly assigned one side of an argument. Each person in the pair had to argue one side. Then you had to present something to the class, and the teacher would try and assign you an argument that he thought you wouldn't naturally be drawn to, that you might not agree with. And so I had to argue for the legalization of prostitution, which is a pretty heavy subject for a 17-year-old, but it was really useful. People would ask follow-up questions, would ask me to justify things, would ask where I got data. And it was a really good introduction to sort of being able to see in real time how other people's minds worked. So if you have an older kid, I highly recommend if you have an IB school near you, get them into an IB program.
All right. Well, as usual, we've been talking for a long time because that's what we do on this podcast. So I don't normally go back and recap the conversation, but I'm going to try to just remind everybody of a couple points we talked about, because I think a lot of this, if you can try to incorporate some of it into your own conversations, might be helpful. So one thing we talked about doing is to try to have both people in a conversation understand the other person's point of view. So maybe repeat it back in a way that shows that they understand it, even if they don't necessarily agree with it. We talked about including personal narratives as a way to really make things sort of come home for people, or if you can find personal connections, things you do agree on, that can be really useful. We talked about the idea of giving one or two reasons for an argument that you're making instead of overloading with, 12 or 14 reasons, and focusing on the thing you're trying to get people to agree with you on, not the thing you're trying to disprove. Mm-hmm. We also talked about, maybe trying to focus on policy and laws and not sort of assigning blame that someone is doing something wrong or they're not doing enough they could, but instead, what are the policies we could put in place? What are the kinds of votes that we could side with, that would help this thing we're trying to do? And then we also talked about the idea that a lot of these kinds of decisions are not light bulb moments, but they take some time. Sometimes you need to be sitting with something for a while. You need to be thinking about it over time. And Kate, you had that lovely thing about saying, I am wrong, does not make sense, because in fact, once you have realized that you are wrong, you have already changed your view. And at that point, it becomes, I was wrong. Have I missed anything?
No, I think that was a good recap.
Thank you.
So let's all, I will take that as homework. Hopefully our listeners, if you have the opportunity to talk to people, I wouldn't recommend going on Twitter and trying to do this. Twitter is great for connecting to people you already agree with. Twitter is not, in my mind, at all useful for trying to change someone's mind. But, maybe try to have some of these conversations, if you can, in person or on Facebook, or check out the Reddit forum. It's called Change My View. Is that right, Kate?
I think that's it. I'm sure Google will be our friend here.
Yeah, I checked it out in prepping for this, and it's really fascinating that people are actually having good, nuanced discussions. So check that out. I think it's really interesting. I'll put a whole ton of links on our website with this podcast episode so that we can all... you can all read those at your leisure and become smug, overeducated liberals. Anyone have any final thoughts on any of this?
Oh, my favorite tip, I think it probably came from Captain Awkward, is it's always okay to say you have to go to the bathroom if you're trying.
I like that.
When that Thanksgiving dinner conversation gets to be too much, just, you know what? I have to go to the bathroom now.
Go to the bathroom, text a friend.
Yep. Look at pictures of cute baby animals. I mean, that's
Yes.
actually a legit therapy.
Yeah.
If you have a newborn, you could really easily get away from a conversation if you need to. So keep having
actually
babies.
done
They're good
that.
excuses.
I've actually pretended like I needed to breastfeed before I did, just to get out of a conversation.
Yeah, we definitely use, often, I hope none of my friends are listening, but there are definitely times when we're kind of just exhausted, my partner and I, and we're like, oh, we have to get home and let the dog out. But I hope none of my dearest friends, we never actually do that to you guys if you're listening.
If you're listening, Emily didn't mean you.
Right, I didn't mean you. Other people.
All right. So, listeners, stay tuned for our second segment of this episode where we will talk to Megan Romer about political Twitter. And you will find out why